The alarm bells rang through the halls of Galactic Academy early that morning. Not the emergency bells that meant danger, but the announcement bells that meant something important was about to happen. Students from dozens of different worlds stopped what they were doing and looked up from their breakfast trays. Hyunwoo Kim pushed his food around his plate and listened to the excited chatter filling the dining hall. His roommate Tai Jin sat across from him, eyes wide with curiosity. The tall human had only been at the academy for 3 months, but he had never seen the other students this worked up about anything. "What do you think it is?" Tai Jin asked, leaning forward. His voice carried that excited tone that meant he was hoping for something interesting to break up their usual routine of classes and study sessions. Before Hyunwoo could answer, the large screens around the dining hall flickered to life. Principal Mordak appeared on every screen, her blue crystalline form shimmering under the lights. The Xerian leader of the academy rarely made personal announcements, which made every student in the hall fall silent. "Students and faculty," Principal Mordak began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall speakers. "Today marks a historic moment for our academy. For the first time in our institution's 300-year history, we will be welcoming a carnivorous species into our student body." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, the dining hall erupted into chaos. Voices rose from every table as students began talking at once. Some sounded excited, others worried, and more than a few sounded terrified. The Herbic students near the front began gathering their things quickly, their leaf-like appendages shaking with obvious fear. The mollusk exchange students pulled their soft bodies deeper into their protective shells. "A carnivore?" Taejin's voice cracked slightly. "Here, in our classes," Hyunwoo continued eating his breakfast, watching the panic spread through the hall with quiet interest. He had grown up on one of Earth's farming colonies, where practical thinking mattered more than emotional reactions. His dark eyes moved from table to table, noting which species seemed most afraid and which seemed curious. Principal Mordak's voice cut through the noise again. "The student in question comes from Sanguia Prime, a Class 5 world. Their species, the Sanguinians, are indeed obligate carnivores, but they have demonstrated remarkable intelligence and a desire to learn about other cultures. This student has passed all our academic requirements and safety evaluations." The mention of a Class 5 world made several more students get up and leave their tables. Most academy students came from Class 1 or Class 2 worlds, peaceful places where the biggest dangers were bad weather or maybe some thorny plants. A Class 5 world meant serious predators, harsh conditions, and species that had evolved to survive by fighting. So Young Lee, a human student from the diplomatic program, slid into the seat next to Hyunwoo. Her usually calm expression showed traces of concern. "This could change everything," she said quietly. "The Academy's reputation is built on being a safe place for peaceful species to learn together. Or it could be exactly what this place needs," Hyunwoo replied, earning surprised looks from both his friends. "When did learning become about staying safe from new ideas?" The principal continued her announcement, explaining the additional security measures that would be put in place. Extra guards, modified dormitory arrangements, and new emergency protocols. The more she talked about precautions, the more nervous the students became. Professor Velthari approached their table, her crystalline body reflecting the morning light in rainbow patterns. The comparative physiology instructor looked as calm as always, but Hyunwoo noticed the slight tremor in her usually steady voice. "Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, Ms. Lee," she said, nodding to each human student. "I wanted to speak with you before classes begin today. As some of our more adaptable students, I hope you'll help make our new arrival feel welcome." "Of course, Professor," So Young replied immediately. "When will we meet them?" "This afternoon during my comparative physiology class. The new student will be joining us for the practical examination of specimen handling." Professor Velthari paused, her faceted eyes reflecting concern. "I must admit I'm not entirely sure how this will proceed. We've never had to consider how a natural predator might react to our usual coursework." After the professor left, the 3 humans sat in thoughtful silence. Around them, the dining hall continued to buzz with nervous energy. Some students were making plans to switch classes, Others were talking about requesting transfers to different dormitories. I don't understand all the panic, Taejin said finally. I mean, they wouldn't let someone dangerous into the academy, right? There must be safeguards. Hyunwoo nodded, but something in his gut told him the situation was more complex than anyone realized. He had spent his childhood learning to read the signs of danger, which animals were truly threatening and which just looked scary. Real predators didn't announce themselves with fear and panic. They moved quietly, watched carefully, and struck when least expected. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of whispered conversations and distracted professors. In advanced botany, their instructor forgot half her lecture while staring at the door as if expecting something to burst through it. The xenological studies professor canceled his afternoon seminar entirely, claiming he needed to review safety protocols. By lunch, the dining hall had only half its usual crowd. Many students had apparently decided to eat in their rooms rather than risk being in a public space when the new student arrived. Those who remained clustered together in groups, speaking in hushed tones and casting nervous glances at every entrance. Hyunwoo found himself growing more curious with each passing hour. What kind of being could cause this much fear just by existing? He had read about Sanguia Prime in his xenobiology texts, a harsh world where pack hunters ruled vast territories, and survival meant constant vigilance. But intelligence had to count for something. No purely savage creature could pass the academy's entrance examinations. As afternoon classes began, security guards appeared in the hallways for the first time in academy history. Their presence only made the remaining students more nervous. Hyunwoo noticed that several guards were positioned near the comparative physiology lab, their hands resting casually on stun weapons. Ready for this? Taejin asked as they approached the lab door. Hyunwoo nodded, checking his watch. In 10 minutes they would meet the being that had turned their peaceful academy upside down, with nothing more than an acceptance letter. He found himself looking forward to it. After all, he had always been curious about predators. The lab door opened with a soft hiss and Crix entered. Hyunwoo had expected something impressive, but the reality was more striking than anything his imagination had created. The Sanguinian stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a powerful frame that moved with fluid grace. His fur was dark gray with black stripes, and his face combined the best features of a wolf and a large cat. Golden eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with predatory awareness. The reaction was immediate. 3 Herback students bolted for the emergency exit. A pair of mollusk students retracted completely into their shells with loud popping sounds. The remaining students pressed themselves against the far wall, leaving a wide empty space around the newcomer. Crix's ears flattened against his skull, and his shoulders sagged slightly. Even Hyunwoo, who knew nothing about Sanguinian body language, could recognize disappointment and hurt in that posture. Professor Velthari cleared her throat nervously. Class, please welcome our new student, Crix of the Southern Territories of Sanguia Prime. He'll be joining us for the remainder of the semester. A few students managed weak greetings. Most remained silent, staring at the carnivore with wide, frightened eyes. Crix attempted what might have been a smile, but the display of sharp teeth only made several more students edge toward the door. Thank you for having me, he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. I hope we can learn much together. Yes, well, Professor Velthari said, clearly struggling to regain her composure. Let's begin today's practical examination. We'll be studying the handling techniques for various specimen types, ranging from harmless to moderately dangerous. She gestured to a series of containment units along the wall. Today we'll work with Zolothian acid spitters, Mortaxi venom worms, and crystalline spine shooters. Remember, proper technique is essential for safe handling. The class moved toward the specimens with obvious reluctance. No one wanted to work near Crix, leaving him standing alone by an empty table. Hyunwoo watched the situation develop, then made a decision that surprised even himself. Would you like to share a workstation? He asked, walking over to stand beside the towering carnivore. Crix's golden eyes widened in surprise. You're not afraid? Should I be? Hyunwoo replied simply, pulling on protective gloves. For the first time since entering the room, Crix's posture relaxed slightly. Most beings find my kind unsettling. We are, after all, designed by evolution to hunt creatures much like those in this room. They worked together in comfortable silence for several minutes. Hyunwoo noticed that despite his fearsome appearance, Crix handled the specimens with remarkable gentleness. His large clawed hands moved with precise control, never applying more pressure than necessary. "You're good at this," Hyunwoo observed as Crix successfully extracted venom from a particularly aggressive worm without causing it any distress. "My people have always worked with dangerous creatures," Crix explained. "On Sanguia Prime, even our prey species have evolved significant defenses. Patience and respect for their capabilities keeps us alive." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from across the room. A Herback student had mishandled an acid spitter, and the creature was now loose on the table, spraying defensive secretions in all directions. Other students scattered, screaming and knocking over equipment. In their panic, Crix moved before anyone else could react. In 3 fluid steps, he reached the panicking creature and gently but firmly pinned it down, avoiding its defensive spray with movements too quick for most eyes to follow. Within seconds, he had the acid spitter safely contained, purring softly to calm its nerves. "There," he said, stepping back. "No harm done to anyone." The rescued Herback student stared up at Crix with a mixture of terror and gratitude. You saved me. But we all thought that I would eat you?" Crix's laugh was a deep, rumbling sound. "I may be a carnivore, but I'm not savage. I came here to learn, not to hunt classmates." Professor Velthari used the incident as a teaching moment. As we can see, different species bring different strengths to specimen handling. Crix's natural reflexes and experience with dangerous fauna proved invaluable in this situation. As the class continued, Hyunwoo found himself genuinely enjoying Crix's company. The Sanguinian was intelligent, well-read, and surprisingly thoughtful. When they discussed the various creatures they were studying, Crix offered insights that came from actual field experience rather than just textbook knowledge. "On my world, we classify danger differently than most species," Crix explained during a break. "It's not about size or apparent threat level, but about unpredictability and adaptation speed. The most dangerous creatures aren't always the ones with the biggest teeth." "That's interesting," Hyunwoo replied. "How does your world's classification system work?" "We use a simple scale. Class 1 worlds are paradise worlds, like most represented here at the Academy. Class 2 and 3 worlds have moderate challenges: weather, terrain, some hostile flora or fauna. My world, Sanguia Prime, is Class 5. High danger, multiple apex predators, survival requires constant vigilance." "What about higher classifications?" Hyunwoo asked, genuinely curious. "Class 6 and 7 worlds exist, but they're rare. Anything beyond Class 7 is theoretical. We call them Deathworlds, but most scientists believe complex life couldn't evolve under such harsh conditions." Crix paused. "What classification is your homeworld?" "Earth, wasn't it?" "Class 12, Hyunwoo replied casually, then returned his attention to the specimen he was examining. The lab fell silent. Even Professor Velthari stopped mid-sentence to stare at the human student. "I'm sorry," Crix said slowly. "Did you say Class 12? Hyunwoo looked up, noticing that everyone in the lab was now staring at him. "Yes. Why? Is that unusual?" Professor Velthari's crystalline form was flickering rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation that Hyunwoo had never seen before. "Mr. Kim, that classification and it doesn't exist. Our scale only goes to Class 7 and those are considered theoretical maximum danger levels." "Oh," Hyunwoo said, looking puzzled. "Well, I guess Earth's classification system is different. We don't really think about it much. It's just home." Crix leaned closer, his golden eyes intense with curiosity. "What exactly lives on your world that makes it so dangerous?" Hyunwoo shrugged. "The usual stuff, I suppose. Sharks, bears, venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, disease-carrying insects, territorial mammals, pack hunters, ambush predators. No normal wildlife." The silence that followed was so complete that the humming of the lab equipment seemed deafeningly loud. "Normal?" Professor Velthari's voice was barely a whisper. Sure, Hyunwoo continued, apparently oblivious to the shock he was causing. I grew up on a farming colony, so we dealt with wildlife pretty regularly. Most kids learn basic survival skills by age 10. Nothing too dramatic. Crix stared at the human with new understanding dawning in his predatory eyes. The being he had assumed was just another peaceful herbivore was revealing himself to be something far more complex and far more dangerous than anyone in the room had imagined. 3 days later, Professor Velthari announced a field trip to study the local ecosystem. The Academy's planet, Zarian Prime, was considered perfectly safe for educational purposes. Its most dangerous native creature was something the locals called a razor claw, which was roughly equivalent to an earth rabbit with slightly longer teeth. Most students were excited about the opportunity to study living specimens in their natural habitat. Crix seemed particularly interested, having spent most of his life in controlled urban environments on Sanguia Prime. Only Hyunwoo appeared somewhat underwhelmed by the prospect. The group of 20 students and 2 professors took a transport to the nearby Thornwood Preserve, a carefully maintained wilderness area where the planet's dangerous wildlife lived under constant monitoring. Safety scanners had confirmed that nothing more threatening than a few mild irritants inhabited the forest. Remember, students, Professor Velthari called as they disembarked, we're here to observe, not to interfere. The creatures in this preserve are wild animals, and while they pose minimal threat, we must respect their space. The walking path wound through pleasant woodland filled with colorful plants and the sounds of small creatures moving through the undergrowth. Most students stayed close to the professors while Crix ranged slightly ahead, his predatory senses alert to every sound and scent. Hyunwoo walked alongside Taijin and So Young, occasionally stopping to examine interesting plants with the casual expertise of someone who had grown up around agriculture. He seemed more interested in the soil composition than the wildlife. There, whispered Professor Velthari, pointing to a clearing ahead. A family group of razor claws. Notice how they've positioned themselves for optimal escape routes while feeding. The students crept forward to observe the creatures. They were indeed rabbit-like, about the size of house cats, with longer hind legs and slightly enlarged front teeth. They moved in quick, nervous bursts, constantly alert for danger. Fascinating, breathed a mollusk student. Look at their coordination. Each individual watches a different direction while the others feed. Crix studied the animals with professional interest. Pack behavior, but not pack hunting. They're prey animals with evolved group survival instincts. The peaceful observation was interrupted by a sudden commotion in the undergrowth. Something large crashed through the bushes, sending the razor claws fleeing in all directions. What emerged into the clearing made several students scream. The creature stood 4 feet tall at the shoulder, with a muscular build, powerful claws, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Its hide was thick and scarred, and its small, mean eyes fixed immediately on the group of soft, easy-looking prey animals known as students. Alpha Razor Claw, Professor Velthari said, her voice tight with fear. They're not supposed to be this aggressive. Something's wrong. The creature let out a howling roar and charged directly at the cluster of students. Most scattered in panic. A few froze in terror. Crix stepped forward, his own predatory instincts engaging as he prepared to meet the threat. What happened next surprised everyone, including Crix. Hyunwoo stepped calmly into the creature's path and caught it. Not blocked, it not diverted it, not used some tool or weapon. He simply reached out with both hands and caught the charging animal as if it were a mildly enthusiastic dog. The razor claw's momentum carried it forward, but Hyunwoo's feet remained planted, absorbing the impact without apparent effort. Shh, Hyunwoo said gently, holding the struggling creature firmly but without causing injury. You're scared, aren't you? Something drove you from your territory. The razor claw continued to struggle for a moment, then gradually calmed as Hyunwoo's steady grip and soothing voice registered. Its aggressive posture melted into confused submission. There we go, Hyunwoo murmured, examining the animal with quick professional movements. You've got injuries here. Teeth marks. Something bigger than you has been hunting in your area. He looked up at the stunned professors. This one's been displaced by a territorial dispute. Probably hasn't eaten properly in days. With gentle but decisive movements, Hyunwoo carried the razor claw to the edge of the clearing and released it near a patch of the nutritious plants it preferred. The creature looked back at him once with what might have been gratitude before, disappearing into the safe undergrowth. The silence that followed was broken only by the normal sounds of the forest. "How did you do that?" Crix asked, his golden eyes wide with amazement. Hyunwoo looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Do what?" That creature masses at least 40 kilograms and was moving at full charge. The impact alone should have knocked you backward. Instead, you caught it like it was nothing. "Oh, that?" Hyunwoo shrugged. "It wasn't really that big. Back home, we had to deal with black bears sometimes when they got into the crop storage. Those are about 200 kilograms. This little guy was pretty manageable." "Bears?" Professor Velthari's voice cracked. "You said bears?" "Sure. We also had mountain lions, wolves, occasionally some of the big cats if they wandered down from the high country. Nothing too serious, but you learn to handle them when you're living in farming territory." That evening, Crix found Hyunwoo in the academy library. The human was sitting at a quiet table reading a botanical text and making notes in neat handwriting. "Mind if I join you?" Crix asked. "Of course." Hyunwoo gestured to the empty chair across from him. Crix settled his large frame carefully and activated a data terminal. "I've been researching your homeworld," he said without preamble. Hyunwoo looked up with mild interest. "Find anything interesting?" "That's the problem. I can't find much of anything. Earth's files are heavily restricted in the Galactic databases. What little information exists is marked as unconfirmed or requires verification." "Really? That's odd." Hyunwoo returned to his reading, apparently unconcerned. "The few details I could access." Crix paused, choosing his words carefully. "Hyunwoo, according to these records, your species evolved as persistence hunters." "That sounds right." "Do you understand what that means?" Crix leaned forward, his voice intense. "Persistence hunting is when a predator follows prey over vast distances until the prey animal dies of exhaustion. It's one of the most effective and terrifying hunting strategies in nature." Hyunwoo nodded absently. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the old marathons. Humans running down deer across entire mountain ranges, but that's ancient history. We mostly just farm now." "Just farm," Crix repeated slowly. "On a Class 12 Deathworld, surrounded by creatures that would be considered apex predators on most civilized worlds, I suppose." Hyunwoo finally gave Crix his full attention. "Is there something specific you wanted to know?" Crix stared at his new friend, the quiet, gentle being who had casually caught a charging predator and discussed bears as if they were house pets. "What are humans, really?" Hyunwoo considered the question seriously. "We're survivors, I guess. Earth is a challenging place, so we learn to adapt. We're not the strongest or fastest species, but we're persistent, and we work well in groups. Most importantly, we try to solve problems instead of just fighting them. And if fighting becomes necessary?" Hyunwoo's dark eyes met Crix's golden ones steadily. "Then we're very good at it, but we prefer not to." For the first time since arriving at the academy, Crix felt he was beginning to understand the mysterious humans. They weren't weak herbivores playing at being civilized. They were something far more dangerous pretending to be harmless. The emergency alarm started screaming at 2:47 a.m. Galactic Standard Time. Hyunwoo woke instantly, his body responding to the sound with alert readiness that would have surprised anyone who knew him as the quiet botany student. Across the room, Tae-jin was struggling to get out of bed, still groggy with sleep. "What's happening?" Tae-jin mumbled, searching for his emergency light. The intercom crackled to life with Principal Mordak's voice, tense and strained. "All students report to designated safe areas immediately. We have a containment breach in Laboratory 7. This is not a drill. Security teams are responding." Hyunwoo was already dressed and moving toward the door. Years of living on a farming colony had taught him that when alarms went off, you responded quickly and asked questions later. "Containment breach?" Tae-jin was fully awake now, pulling on clothes with panicked haste. What does that mean? It means something that was supposed to stay locked up is now running around loose, Hyunwoo replied, checking the hallway before stepping out of their room. The corridors were filled with confused students moving toward the safe areas. Most were still in sleeping clothes. Many were crying or calling for help. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows that made everything look more threatening than usual. So Young appeared beside them, already dressed and carrying what looked like an emergency medical kit. Has anyone seen what got loose? She asked. Nothing yet, Hyunwoo replied. But from the sound of those alarms, it's serious. They were halfway to Safe Area C when they encountered the first security team. 3 guards were backed up against a wall, their stun weapons drawn but ineffective. In front of them, blocking the corridor, were 2 creatures that made the aggressive razor claw from their field trip look like a house pet. The beings were clearly from a high classification world. Each stood nearly 6 feet tall with armored hide, multiple limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, and heads full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Their eyes glowed with predatory intelligence as they advanced on the terrified guards. More taxi. Battlehounds, one guard whispered into his communicator. Class 6 predators. Stun weapons are ineffective. Requesting immediate backup with heavy containment gear. The creatures heard the transmission and moved faster, their multiple limbs carrying them in a scuttling rush toward the guards. One guard screamed and dropped his weapon. That's when Crix appeared. The Sanguinian came around the corner at full sprint, his powerful frame moving with deadly grace. He hit the first battlehound with a tackle that sent both creatures crashing into the wall with tremendous force. His claws and teeth were fully extended now, and he fought with the savage efficiency of his species. But there were 2 predators, and even Crix couldn't handle both at once while protecting the guards. The second battlehound circled behind him, preparing to strike at his unprotected back. Hyunwoo moved. Later, the security recordings would be analyzed by xenobiology experts trying to understand what they had witnessed. The human student covered 15 meters in just over 2 seconds, not running but moving with a predatory glide that seemed to flow around obstacles. He struck the second battlehound with precision that spoke of instinctive understanding, of anatomy and leverage. The creature, which massed nearly twice what Hyunwoo did, went down hard. It tried to rise, found itself held immobile by a grip that seemed impossibly strong, and made the mistake of trying to bite the human holding it. Hyunwoo's response was swift and educational. His free hand struck 3 precise points on the creature's armored head. The battlehound's eyes rolled back and it went limp. Pressure points, Hyunwoo explained to the staring guards, as if knocking out apex predators was routine. Most nervous systems have similar vulnerabilities once you know what to look for. Crix had finished subduing his opponent and was staring at Hyunwoo with new understanding. Where did you learn to fight like that? Growing up on Earth, you learn basic self-defense, Hyunwoo replied, checking to make sure both creatures were securely unconscious. We had to deal with aggressive wildlife fairly regularly. Basic self-defense, Crix repeated slowly. The intercom crackled again. Security teams, report status. We have additional breaches in laboratories 5 and 9. Unknown number of specimens loose. So Young was already moving her medical training, making her think tactically. If there are more of these things loose, students in the safe areas could be trapped. The safe areas are only designed to handle normal emergencies, one of the guards said, his voice shaking. They won't hold against Class 6 predators. Hyunwoo looked at Crix, and some silent communication passed between them. How many more creatures are we dealing with? Unknown, the guard replied. The laboratories contained specimens from 12 different worlds, including some Class 7 predators that were being studied for defensive capabilities. Class 7? Even Crix sounded concerned. We need to stop this before it gets worse, Hyunwoo said, his voice taking on an authority that none of his friends had heard before. Crix, can you track the other escaped creatures? Yes, but good. So Young, can you coordinate with security to evacuate students to more secure locations? Already on it, she replied, speaking rapidly into her communicator with the kind of tactical precision that suggested her diplomatic training covered more than just negotiations. Taejin, I need you to access the laboratory databases. Find out exactly what we're dealing with and where they're likely to go. His roommate nodded, pulling out his tablet with hands that were steady despite the circumstances. As they moved through the corridors, Crix began to see Hyunwoo differently. The human moved through the crisis with calm efficiency, making decisions quickly and adapting to changing situations without hesitation. More importantly, he seemed to understand predator behavior on an instinctive level. There, Crix said, pointing to claw marks on a wall. 3 more went this direction. They followed the trail through darkened corridors, past abandoned security equipment and signs of hasty evacuation. The deeper they went into the academy, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just a simple containment failure. This is coordinated, Hyunwoo observed, studying the damage patterns. These creatures aren't just wandering randomly. They're hunting systematically. Hunting what? Us. They found the answer around the next corner. A pack of 6 different predator species had cornered a group of younger students in a dead-end corridor. The creatures weren't attacking yet. They were savoring the fear the way intelligent predators do when they have prey trapped with no escape. Crix growled low in his throat, his battle instincts fully engaged. There are too many, even working together. Then we don't fight them, Hyunwoo interrupted. We hunt them. What followed was a lesson in the difference between individual combat and pack tactics. Hyunwoo didn't engage the predators directly. Instead, he moved through the shadows, using the Academy's architecture and his understanding of predator psychology to separate the pack, confuse their coordination, and create opportunities for Crix to strike effectively. When it was over, 6 apex predators lay unconscious or immobilized in the corridor, and a group of terrified students was free to reach safety. The entire engagement had taken less than 4 minutes. How? Crix asked, breathing heavily from exertion. How did you know how to do that? Hyunwoo looked at his friend with eyes that held depths of knowledge Crix was only beginning to understand. Because that's what humans do, Crix. We are not the biggest predators or the strongest or the fastest, but we're the best at hunting other hunters. By dawn, the crisis was over. All escaped specimens had been recaptured or neutralized. No students or faculty had been seriously injured, thanks largely to the actions of an unlikely partnership between the Academy's most feared student and its most underestimated one. But word of what had happened was already spreading through the galactic academic community. The humans weren't what anyone had thought they were, and that was going to change everything. 2 weeks after the containment breach, the Academy had returned to something resembling normal routine. But the changes were impossible to ignore. Students who had once avoided Crix now sought him out for study groups and casual conversation. More importantly, they had begun approaching the human students with a mixture of curiosity and respectful wariness. Hyunwoo sat in his favorite spot in the library, working on a research project about cross-species agricultural techniques. It was peaceful work that reminded him of home, even if home was beginning to feel like a very distant concept. Mind if we join you? He looked up to find Crix approaching with an unlikely group of companions. A Herback student named Lithia walked beside the towering Carnivore without any trace of the fear she had shown weeks earlier. Behind them came Jin A, another human student from the engineering program, and Velthak, a mollusk who had spent the first month of classes completely hidden in his shell whenever Crix was in the room. Of course, Hyunwoo replied, gesturing to the empty chairs around his table. What are you working on? Our final project for comparative physiology, Crix explained, settling his large frame carefully into a reinforced chair. Professor Velthari wants us to present on predator-prey relationships and how they've shaped the evolution of intelligence across different worlds. And we wanted to ask you about something, Lithia added, her leaf-like appendages rustling with nervous energy. The night of the breach, when you and Crix stopped those creatures, how did you know what to do? Hyunwoo considered the question, carefully. It wasn't the first time someone had asked, and he was still working out how to explain concepts that seemed obvious to him, but apparently were remarkable to others. I grew up learning to read animal behavior, he said finally. When You live around dangerous wildlife. You learn to understand their patterns. Predators aren't random. They have strategies, preferences, weaknesses. Once you understand those things, you can predict their actions and plan accordingly. But those were Class 6 and Class 7 predators, Velthak pointed out, his translator making his voice sound tinny and artificial. They're supposed to be nearly impossible to handle without heavy weapons and specialized training. Maybe, Hyunwoo replied. But intelligence is intelligence regardless of classification. A smart predator follows logical patterns even if those patterns are more complex than what you might see from simpler creatures. Jin'e leaned forward, her expression serious. Hyunwoo, we've been doing some research of our own, about Earth, about humans. The information we can access, it's incomplete, but what we've found is disturbing. Disturbing how? Crix activated a holographic display above the table, showing a series of data files. Most galactic databases list Earth as a restricted world. The few details available describe it as uninhabitable due to extreme environmental hazards. But that's not the interesting part, Lithia added. The interesting part is that every species that has had contact with humans describes them differently. To some, you're peaceful farmers and diplomats. To others, you're described as efficient soldiers and explorers. To a few, she paused, checking her notes. To a few, you're described as the species that hunts the hunters. Hyunwoo looked around the table at his friends, seeing genuine concern in their expressions. What exactly are you asking me? We're asking what humans really are, Crix said quietly. Because everything we've learned suggests that your species is far more complex and potentially dangerous than anyone in the galaxy realizes. For a long moment, Hyunwoo didn't respond. He stared at the holographic display, thinking about home, about the lessons his grandfather had taught him during long walks through territories where death could come from any direction, about the careful balance between civilization and the wilderness that had shaped his people for thousands of years. Humans are survivors, he said finally. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us in every possible way. Weather, predators, diseases, natural disasters, resource scarcity. Earth doesn't make anything easy. So we learned to adapt. But adaptation alone doesn't explain what we saw during the breach, Jin'e pointed out. You're right, Hyunwoo agreed. Adaptation made us tough, but it didn't make us effective. What made us effective was learning to work together, to think strategically, and to understand our enemies better than they understand themselves. He gestured to the holographic display. Every creature has strengths and weaknesses. Predators are usually strong, fast, well-armed, and aggressive. But they also tend to be overconfident, territorial, and predictable once you understand their hunting patterns. Humans learn to use those weaknesses against them. You hunt predators, Crix said, and it wasn't a question. When necessary, yes. But more importantly, we learn to think like predators without becoming them. We can be aggressive when we need to be, but we don't have to be. We can work in groups without losing individual identity. We can plan strategically without losing the ability to adapt when plans fail. Velthak's artificial voice carried a note of awe. You're describing a species that has all the advantages of predators and prey animals, with none of the disadvantages. Not none, Hyunwoo corrected gently. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally armed. What we are is persistent and adaptable. Give us time and we'll find a solution to almost any problem. Including problems like us, Lithia said, and there was no fear in her voice, only curiosity. If it came to that, yes, but that's not what we want. Hyunwoo looked around the table at faces that had become genuinely dear to him. We want to learn, to grow, to understand. Fighting is something we're good at, but it's not something we enjoy. Crix leaned back in his chair, processing what he had heard. So when you came to the academy, you weren't hiding what you were. You were just being what you preferred to be? Exactly. Hyunwoo smiled. I'd much rather spend my time figuring out how to grow better crops than fighting predators. But if predators threaten my friends, he shrugged. Well, then I deal with the predators first and get back to farming later. Over the following days, Word of their conversations spread through the academy in the way that important revelations always do, quietly, person to person, until everyone knew but no one could quite explain how they had learned it. The change in atmosphere was subtle but significant. Students no longer saw the humans as mysterious or potentially dangerous. Instead, they began to understand them as beings who had chosen to be peaceful, despite being capable of far more. For their final project, Crix and Hyunwoo presented together on the topic of predatory intelligence and cooperative evolution. Their thesis was simple but profound. True strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to know when domination was unnecessary. Professor Velthari awarded them the highest grade in the class, but more importantly, she recommended their paper for publication in the Journal of Galactic Biology. It would be the first academic work to accurately describe human capabilities and philosophy from a xenobiological perspective. On their last night before semester break, Crix found Hyunwoo on one of the Academy's observation decks, looking out at the stars. "Thinking about home?" the Sanguinian asked, settling beside his friend. "Always," Hyunwoo replied. "You?" "More than usual. I'm wondering what my pack will think when I tell them about humans." "What will you tell them?" Crix considered the question seriously. "That I learned the difference between being dangerous and being threatening. That strength without wisdom is just another form of weakness. And that the most successful predators are those who choose not to hunt." Hyunwoo nodded, watching a transport ship disappear into hyperspace. "That sounds about right." "There's something else," Crix said. "The Academy has offered me a permanent position here after graduation, teaching assistant in comparative physiology, with the possibility of becoming a full professor eventually." "That's wonderful. You'll be excellent at it." "They offered the same position to you," Crix said quietly. Hyunwoo turned to look at his friend with surprise. "They did?" "Professor Velthari says your insights into predator behavior and cross-species cooperation are exactly what the Academy needs. You could help train the next generation of students to understand that different doesn't have to mean dangerous." For a long moment, Hyunwoo stared out at the stars, thinking about farms and families and the wide, dangerous, beautiful world that had made him who he was. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "After all, someone needs to make sure you don't scare the new students too badly." Crix's laugh was warm and rich, carrying across the observation deck like a promise of friendship that would last far longer than their time at the Academy. In the distance, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small but significant changes happening on one tiny Academy world where a carnivore and a human had learned to understand each other, and in doing so, had helped their classmates understand that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy were often the ones who chose to be gentle